Evening. That was fun. I wanted to examine the D major today in light of my thought to create a new sequence in terms of teaching the Well-Tempered Clavier. We are often drawn to work on those pieces that we find challenging and lovely to play. And quite often those are some of the more complex keys. I dare say there's a predilection for, you know, the minor keys in the more orchestral settings. The G minor is a big favorite, you know. But the complex keys often have really complex problems. They present problems that we need to access several different types of interpretive and perceptive tools to address those pieces. Whereas I've come to realize that, as I've mentioned, some of the pieces that ended up in book one were originally pieces in one form or another as part of the notebook for Wilhelm Friedman Bach. So they were meant as teaching pieces. They weren't meant as etudes for virtuosity. They were meant as studies in contrapuntal clarity. And so these are not virtuoso exercises. They are exercises in clarity, and therein lies a very particular challenge in each of these pieces. When we spoke about the C major early on, it was a matter of thinking about trying to figure out the gesture and how we might address repetition of pattern and overholding, and there were lots of things to deal with in what appeared to be a very placid and unvarying texture. Correct. And then the G major, I started talking a little bit about shifting the spotlight, that Martin Scorsese reference. In that we're looking at it in terms of tandem textures that we want to somehow differentiate, not grotesquely, but in a way that is discernible, in a subtle sort of way, and moreover, one that would be possible to do on the harpsichord. What would Bach do in this exercise? The texture of the G major is unvarying. How do we bring that to life? How do we bring it to some kind of clarity that makes it a worthwhile study? And I maintain, yes, the more we get into it, well, the more we get to a microscopic level, i.e., as I've counseled on many occasions, we have to determine the relationship between one note and the next, dynamically, articulatively, whether connected or distinct. All of these are calibrations that happen one note to the next on a very microscopic level. And so I like to take in the G major, 3/8 cells, which also points up the nice dichotomy, the potential for hemiola, and just the play between duple and triple in Bach's works. If you haven't all seen Ashley's wonderful class on the C minor partita, we did two movements, the Sinfonia and the Sarabande, and you really must. Well, I mean, how many movements of that is that in fact, Ashley? Right? Because with the opening, the grave adagio, and then the andante, and then the allegro, and the sarabande. So there were actually many movements, but only two as far as scorekeeping is concerned. But yes, you ought to really watch that class. It was phenomenally transformative work that Ashley achieved. It was just amazing. In the G major, when we have voices that are not, when we're connecting, I like overholding, but now really letting go on each one of those. So not a toggling. It's because I was thinking about legato, which is fine, and I'm thinking shorter, separate. But I think it's actually better to actually say this is going to be sticky. I'm still not going to go to that top note, but very sticky. And now three ups. And that's even easier and more direct than saying, oh, we're going to make these shorter. That's a sort of a note by note decision. This way we can actually do it in eighths, like two note slurs. And if it sounds too short in the right hand, we have the alternatively super legato left hand to cover up for it. I'm really enjoying that. So speaking of letting go, I think that's what all this prelude is all about. Again, this is actually something that came up when I was working on the. Oh, by the way, I'm playing on an 1826 Graf fortepiano that I play. As it happens, I have Logic Pro setups for Volume 1, and I have them for setup for Volume 2 because I've got 24 instruments, for each prelude and fugue, and I'm trying not to go back and forth in the middle of a speech here, but so I looked it up, and an amazing number of the pieces I play the same instrument. For instance, the D major I play in both books, the Graf. And I know there are other correspondences, completely unintentional, but just, I guess, over the course of time, when I got around to assigning an instrument to each of these pieces, I think that's amazing, isn't it? So yes, the Graf is my D major key. Oh, and D major, for all of us aficionados, is Kat's favorite key. Elliot, my cat back in Cleveland, the Tonkinese, loved particularly when I played Us and Them by Pink Floyd. I arranged that piece, and he was really excited about my latest arrangement of All Tomorrow's Parties, which was also in D major. So that was a big thing, and I took on Schubert D major sonata for him for a while, but it wasn't a good time for that piece for both of us, I think. But so yeah, here we are with D major here, and indeed Iman is probably going to come around, I'm sure, shortly to get some D major love. This, I feel, is an etude in letting go, in this idea of effervescing. Instead of, oh yeah, as I was saying, I thought of this today in particular because I was working, I recorded the other day the E minor, and we thought about, we think about it in terms of, it's not an allemande, but it's a duet. It's very clearly a duet. So we're very keen on making sure that we have a good sense of the exchange of voices. And then we note in passing that that the first bar is the opposite of the second bar. Basically, they're the yin and yang of each other, and it's always good to note that in passing, I suppose. But I just thought of it when I was going through it yesterday. We have to really, I'm always a great believer in finding different characters within one subject, but this is ridiculous, right? Because we're really just, the up version and the down version, but they, I think, need to have that kind of distinction, so they're a little bit more striving on the upward, a little bit more suffering on the way down, probably a little bit more overheld, a little bit more stepwise, or some variation of that. But yes, the upward striving definitely has a character, and the falling always has a particular character, and that's within one subject. And so it was only in terms of thinking of this very simplistic version of these 3 days of Facebook Lives. C major has one set of tricks, G major has another set of tricks. The D major is the one that I think really is a set study in turning this ostensibly continuous line of 16th notes into a set of gestures. Look at the right hand in the very beginning. Already we have a sense of, within the right hand is sort of a microcosm of the whole piece, sort of twice. So we've got just as we have this, the bass line is there. I just find that sort of a nice sort of fractal image of sort of the schematic nature of the piece, and so now I find myself wanting to practice this extremely slowly, and try and make sense of it not as a continuation. We have the visual cue, and I did for the E minor. I want to connect all those 16th notes. They seem sort of angry. I should really tend to them, but it really, they need to be two different gestures. And here we have two. Here's another an added emphasis to the bass line. So basically, and then all kinds of other resonances are allowed to come through if we play that. I just love that. But we never would have heard that if we didn't really take it all apart and say, here's the evaporative one, and now this is retiring, but rather a little bit more earthbound. We start getting into it from the standpoint of, these are the elements that we're dealing with, and sometimes they don't always have to be always the same thing. Sometimes the downward things, when we get into a harmonic sequence of some interest and tension, right? check this fingering out. 1, 4, 3, 2, 1, 3, 4, 5. I find it very handy. I have this one marked before it, a couple of bars I have marked. I very, very rarely do that 1, 4, 3, 2, 1, 3, 4, 5. But I think it's a matter of when I really want to have much more of a tenuto quality, because we are coming to a sort of resolution here. I love the idea of that being a sort of a truncated. We're sort of ready for the sequence to roll on a little bit, and then the bass note insists. No, that here we are. We're in E minor land for a while. I love the interaction of many elements within one apparent line. And because I think once we take this apart visually, when we're looking at this and we see this continuous line, and now if we start really picking it apart into syllables, this time to also say, well, sometimes a cigar is just a cigar. So in other words, eventually, when it gets a little craggier and more interesting harmonically, we can actually look at this as one line, as one very rhetorically active line. So. So even within this long sequence of 16th notes, there is an apparent, I think a very apparent difference between that and this. And I love that it has this, and this really does feel Brahmsian to me. The G major, like the G major violin sonata, that basically, the recap is essentially in the subdominant. And I think it lends for me a feeling of familial closeness. It's not the return. It's the embrace and the plagal reality of the theme. And I think that in itself, the plagal element, the subdominant element, has that sort of not ritualistic but spiritual aspect, I think. Talked about the bass notes, and again, I think this is another one of these situations where it's very, very important to use the bass not as a traffic cop, but I wanted to do, like I did with Ashley transcontinentally. I had her play a line like this by herself, and I accompanied her. But I would only play not where we would expect the rhythm to go, but I would play where she was telling me that she wanted the line to go. So, and we had a funny story about Yo-Yo Ma and Emmanuel Axe, and having to do with um, refuting and deferring expectations. This was something I heard in the elevator of the Mayflower Hotel a long time ago, and it was Manny and Yo-Yo doing 5 pieces in folk style of Schumann, very character pieces, and I know them really well, and they played them really, really well. But it just I was just in the 6 floors that I was riding the elevator. It occurred to me that there was never an attack that they were together, and it just I mean, and I have to think that Yo-Yo just said, just play, you know, we've agreed on, basically what's going on. I'm still going to be on my own. It just made him, I don't know. I didn't like the way it made Manny sound. It made Manny sound like he couldn't come in on time, when in fact I know Yo-Yo was being a very singer-like type, diva, and just doing something very special with the attack. But with the same idea here, I'm not even going to try and predict where the bass note is going to come in. I'm going to listen to my right hand, listen to the upper voice, and try and make it synchronous. I mean, that's the other thing. People who play, sort of hands not together, like Michelangelo in the Ravel concerto. I mean, every attack slightly late. I mean, it's wonderful and it's hypnotic the way he does it, but there are other ways of doing that don't sound bad. So yes, I'm going to try and be a very good collaborator with my left hand, and so that's going to involve being a little bit longer in those passages where I really want to lighten up with the right hand, but I get a little bit scared of letting go. It's very hard. It's very easy if we let go, knowing that we have a sonorous bass note. If the bass player didn't, all of a sudden just decide to, and leave you hanging, So let's see if we can do this. This is another one of these places where I instigate a fair amount of shifting of the spotlight. Let me get me up and running here. Here we are. So, for instance, here you can see in my score. I have them marked in sort of opposing ways. I have them marked sort of as Hauptstimmes as follows. So I am actually shifting the spotlight between the right and the left hand, because I don't want to have this. I think that's deadly. I think that's really deadly, and he means for them to be separate voices, even though they're momentarily in lockstep. I try and avoid that like the plague, as much as I also tend to avoid or eschew or obfuscate. Take your pick of those words. Moments of obvious chromaticism. I think maybe one minor second is enough, and then after that, I want to start thinking about it in terms of maybe it's an ambient and more harmonic note. it's sort of the barbershop quartet, or sort of how dry I am kind of thing. That kind of thing really bothers me. So, to exaggerate, here we are. And of course, they're all audible, but we really make a point of making them distinct. And the whole great thing about the letting go idea really comes to fruition now in the fugue, because we have the opportunity to do this. Well, we can look at it and say, should it be sort of militaristic? If we were playing this on the harpsichord, these would make an enormous amount of noise, right? But we can also mitigate just the noise-making aspect of this figure. First of all, the less noise we make, the better, because we're also trying to communicate the idea of a silent, strong downbeat. And so we want to have a sense of buoyancy. We are holding this aloft by virtue of its we just want to make it an upward sweep, and then I maintain so there's 4 30 seconds, and now 2 and 2. And so I actually internally, and sometimes quite externally, I'm actually making a slur out of these 4, and now 2 and 2. And the more I want to accentuate and define that figure, the more I make in terms of space between the figures. So the more I compress that, the more I can, first of all, make it give it a feeling of being aloft, and also the sense of being on a weak beat. And then these can also act as, again, we want to plan ahead, because if we go necessarily from the resultant sound of this, well, actually, I'm really trying to take great care in not making a big crescendo, a swoop. I'm just making. I'm really pretending like I am putting a slur there, and so that means that the end of the slur we let go. I mean, it's like we were taking the bow off the string, literally, not digging in. What? That's what I mean by making a slur. So there's an impetus at the beginning of the slur, and then the end of the slur is letting it go. And now we do 2 more in a row, and we can actually plan ahead so that, or we can decide to make them. We can make it the most songful it's ever going to be, depending on when we want to do that. I mean, it's lots of fun to wait, I think, until really in growling away there in the bass. I think that's my favorite one to play legato out of all of them. And now it's also a matter. I'm telling you, there's there are opportunities within the first quarter note, the first sounding quarter note, to play with compression, definition, distinction between 4-note groups and 2-note groups. And now, if we acknowledge, and I really feel we should acknowledge, the possibility of variation, even within one very quick and constantly recurring rhythmic motive, part of the subject, the more we have to acknowledge that the other elements of the subject should be also as malleable. So I like this first one. I like, it's marked as a 16th note. But I don't know. I like it. I like being in this, still in this world, this slightly snare drum oriented sort of world. But then we can relax. That's a real 16th note, right? And that's an even broader 16th note, because what I want to do is make a very, very comfortable environment for the next entrance. Also, probably, yeah, it's also wonderful to acknowledge at this part of the proceedings. I know, yes, we're expecting, we're sitting expectantly for waiting for the arrival of the second entrance of the theme. But here's traffic, so I'm gonna close this door. I mean, we know what's coming. What we don't know what's coming is whether it's a real answer or a tonal answer, because depending on the compositional process, sometimes a real answer at the fifth sounds great. Other times sometimes you feel like a nut, and other times you don't. This, as it happens, is a real answer, but I would like to leave us in a state of disbelief until we actually hear it. It's to not. So that's why I'm playing around with the 16ths. That's pretty good. That's a closed circle. I love the fact that and we will be in this world again, just two voices. I also think this is a wonderful opportunity and an exercise to talk about and experiment with note heads as placeholders. In other words, I really don't think there's any great future in holding those through, nor here. You hear how I'm holding them through their full printed length? Why would I do something like that? Why? I mean, we only live once, correct? I mean, my gosh, this should go. Yeah, the braver I am, the more of a space I'm going to be making there, because I want this to end in the air. And actually, the more I leave the ground, the more I jete in that moment, the more convincing it's going to be to do whatever kind of dotting I want in that moment. What? No, see, I hung on like a coward. That's a little too short. That could be a cello pizzicato quarter note. That could qualify as a quarter note. Oh, I found, actually, I found, and Katerina probably should note this too. I found another slur today, and it was a figure like this. The 3 30-seconds. It must have been in. Yeah, it was in the F sharp major in book 2. And there were 3 30-second notes in one slur, 3 30-seconds, and so this one doesn't have slurs because but it's actually going somewhere. The ones in the slur were obviously it was really meant to be a flourish, and that's why they were self-contained and compressed. So I saw these 3/16, 3 30-seconds. I thought, no, darn it. I like the idea of, also it's an enormous help playing on the graph, which apparently is my instrument of choice for the evening. But part of that is the transparency within the sound of the piece, of the sound of the piano itself. I really should let's let's play fair, okay? And I'll play it on the New York Steinway, so we'll hear what a sostenuto instrument, what we need to do in order to make that work in this texture. What's so fun about playing this on any instrument is that when I decide that I'm only going to hold the melody, I'm actually taking great care to make these sound, and this D is already held, so it's just a matter of when I want to release it. Sorry. As Katerina and I were working on the E minor toccata the other day, and I was cutting it together today, we were amazed to discover, and Ashley and I worked on this as well, amazed to discover how, first of all, how much more possible and how much more malleable it is when we get into a situation where we are instead of trying to outdo one voice rather than another, because I know there are, I think this is somewhat true of even romantic repertoire. I get very tired of just one voice muscling the next one out of the way when it's much simpler and there's much more variety within a world in which we make things more transparent, making the accompanying or collaborating voices much more transparent, really altering the printed length to allow that kind of accommodation. As you can hear, that I'm still tapering these long notes, and I'm taking great care so that only the melody at that particular moment is sounding. It gives it a nice dichotomy. You know, this particular fugue has a sense about it of being sort of a French overture style thing because of the sort of the militaristic aspects of the rhythm, but it has nothing to do with French overture style, but it has that militaristic, that proud feeling about it. But what we really have to also look very closely at is, you know, my favorite, which is this, the falling tetrachord. Right, and here. So for all these dotted rhythms, it's always going to do, the falling tetrachord is always going to do the same thing. So we're again finding a schematic way of organizing this theme, I feel, so that we have the forward moving part of the theme, and now just so there's the adventurous one, and there's the Florestan, and then there's the Eusebius. Florestan and Eusebius. Actually, there's a little bit of Eusebius in Florestan this time, because I'm deciding to spread those 30 seconds of the second half of the quarter. I'm always underestimating how much time I can take with those paired 30 seconds, because this I'm so enamored of because of that moving that I'm a little wary of The more separate and more caressing I make them, the better it's going to be. I know what's going to help. What's going to help is if I enlist the aid of our accompanist and our collaborator, our accommodator. There you go. Yeah, and now this crux is interesting because, of course, there's obviously the connection there, but how can we make it a more of a connection, more of a plausible and direct connection rather than a resonating connection? I think one way of doing it is to take these opportunities to really. I mean, the thing that I've been so frustrated before is that I've not been taking enough time on, because I really want to distinguish those, and I'm getting there here. That's good, but this one's really got to go on. Yeah, so this is a different figuration. So if I'm a little bit slower with these 30-second notes and a little bit faster with the 16ths, I think it'll actually make a nice join. Sorry. Yeah, make more space, Chris, between and there. Yeah. Now, do you hear what I'm doing all of this time? I'm doing a lot with varying lengths of notes, and I'm also doing a lot of agogic spacing between these figures, between here and here and here, and using that to our advantage, and then making more of a palpable connection. And it's all about space. I don't think I'm really doing much in the way of dynamics at all. Should I? I don't know. I think a lot of the drama is in this rhythmic interplay, and in the expansion, the expansion or compression of elements of the theme. We've already established that this can have a militaristic and an expressive feeling. I'm a great believer and fan of saying that, unlike in a Beethoven sonata, when notes get twice as fast, they don't necessarily get twice as exciting. I have a friend who insists that they get twice as expressive, and this would make quite a lot of noise on the harpsichord. But on the piano, we can mollify and modify so that it doesn't make a lot of noise, and we can actually be more respectful of that as an. I'm sorry he didn't write the slur. I know he meant it. Okay. Of course he meant it. Here's a rising tetrachord. And now a falling tetrachord. So, it's everything is connected. Everything becomes more and more clear. And even as they are connected, rising and falling, the rising figure is an evanescent figure, not a didactic one. very much against type. This is the falling figure. In fact, is very stentorian and noble, right? So I think that may be at least the spiritual connection between the prelude and the fugue, because in the prelude we're dealing with two different impetuses within one line, and so it's that constant give and take and the variation of between those elements that I think gives the piece its joy and gives it its sense of play. And actually, because the fugue subject is so twice as fast. I mean, 1/4 is 30 seconds, and then the rest is basically quarter notes, more or less. But it's just this sudden outburst, and you're going to do that how many times? Oh my gosh, it's actually it's another thing that it has in common with its sister fugue in Book 2. It's one of my favorite fugues. And it's actually, I should talk about it for a second, because when I first began my journey with the Well-Tempered Clavier, I was really very interested in the idea of variable articulation. And then, because I was always tired of hearing, but a little, the Mozart concertos, short eighth notes, and then these, so smooth legato. And I thought, for starters, it would be nice to look at those upbeat eighth notes as variable. So maybe the first one's short, but maybe then they grow into a more lyric, like a singer might, right? And so I thought that would be a nice way to address this fugue subject, is to go in a progressive manner to towards a more lyrical result. So the problem with that was, and at this point early on, I was working all of the fugues on the harpsichord. I have a half dozen harpsichords, and that doesn't read on the harpsichord. Gradual adjustment of eighth notes at 160 per. And so I started looking at this in terms of maybe a binary sort of function, or because and this happens all the time. I mean, in Katerina's E minor toccata, these are two gestures. There's a very close wrenching minor second, and there's an octave. They're two different things. So instead of making a gradual adjustment in articulation, which would not work on the harpsichord, I decided to say, as I have in every session that we've done here, that we have to make a decision. Every decision has to be based on the relationship between one note and the next. So if we look at it just strictly from an articulative standpoint, we can make those three upbeat eighth notes short, long, short. No, it doesn't really work, does it? Because like here, we wanted them to do two different functions, a minor second and an octave. And here, I think we need to have long, short, long. So one is bottom. Actually, that's even more wonderful idea is to make this not even thinking of it as a statement of a theme, but just an opportunity to be skyborn. So there's one that goes up, and then one that goes down. And now this is a different thing. We were talking, actually it came up in the C minor partita, and it came up, I think, a little bit in the E minor, in the more fantasy movements of the. There's our falling tetrachord, but it's a long range fall, and there are moments where we actually are closing in on by way of ornamentation. It happened much more often in the C minor. But so in other words, we're not creating a line. We're not projecting a line, presenting a line. So this creates and one is rather the three repeated eighth notes tend to have a very serious if not serious, they're deadly serious when we have repeated eighth notes when we're driving the nails of the cross in. This one, I think, is perhaps deliberative, more meditative. It's certainly a I think the repeated notes are definitely a sign of suffering. I think there's no getting around that. I don't think we can say this is an anthem. Well, it could be I know some nations that don't have particularly great anthems, but this is more of an outward pronouncement. The upward third. If we wanted to break it up between, this would be Florestan. And this would be Eusebius. The reason I bring this up is, just look at my score here, 100 times in this fugue, Bach either uses the first syllable or this one on its own. 100 times. I just thought that was so cool. It was so amazing, and so it actually made me think. I mean, I should have prepared and counted before I arrived to see how many times we have it. But I'm sure it's probably a generous amount. I'm looking at our comments. Yes, Ashley is saying the transparency that is achievable on our instruments was really mind-blowing to discover. It's mind-blowing to me too, and I have unfair advantage, Ashley, because I have all these instruments that just completely die. They have such porousness to the sound, and dealing with the Yamahas, as I say, it's for people who want to have a sound that will go to the back of the hall. There's nothing wrong in wanting that, but it's not. I don't think it should be the prime directive. I've always been more enamored of pianos that could teach me something, and that always had to do with the touch and the malleability of the sound. But it really gets into a situation where I think there are people who really just, well, in particular with Bach, I think there are people who just want to get all the voices out equally and clearly, and that's the best they could hope for, and that's the best they can do. Well, we know it's the best they can do, but why would anybody want to listen to that? And why would you want to work so hard just to achieve that? Isn't it much more fun to be? Gosh, I'm constantly in a state of wonderment about what can be done in every moment of these pieces. And also, I mean, and the main takeaway in particular in the work on fugues, that I realize now more than ever is, and I still, as I'm recording all of these, again, I realize that the more we really give in to the yin and yang of motion within the subject, and then its interactions with the counter subjects and other elements of the theme through a fugue, the more we really let that be reflective on the momentum of the piece, really allowing ourselves to pull the reins in on those moments, that A minor fugue, at the end of book one, those stakes in the ground or in the heart are opportunities for us to really hold the tempo. And so many of these fugues become so much simpler when we acknowledge that there are places where he is making a much craggier, sudden harmonic motion, once every 16th note. This is the time to take time for the piece to be momentarily driven by 16ths only, and the momentum will come back. I had the worst revelation was this, because I know Daniel Barenboim has many proponents of the way he describes rubato as if there is some cosmic metronome that, knowing that he wants to take some time here, he has in mind where exactly he will make it back, 2 bars later. And I understand people, believe in this. He's the one who most eloquently stated it. I've always been a believer in taking what you need when you need it, whether it's a matter of needing more time to acknowledge exchange of voices or a surprise harmony, or whether we want to move forward when the material seems quite mellifluous and fluid, then we do that. And I realized, oh my God, I bet Daniel Barenboim's cosmic metronome would probably say that I'm right, and that now, just by virtue of the fact that I'm making these adjustments according to the content, which is what I really think we need to do altogether, to allow the content to determine everything, to determine momentum, content to determine the dynamics with the contour, intonation, whether we need more time or more volume or more space, more dark matter between the notes to convey that sense of the intervals. All of these are clues to take time. I don't see it as a matter of, oh, well, if I take some time here, I'll make it up here. That's so arbitrary. But I think in the end, I probably achieve the same thing that he does. But I think I have better reason for it, and I'm having a lot more fun doing it, because when I find a resurgent moment of a fugue subject, it's because I've allowed myself to relax and be poised, and so allow that to be a surge of energy, not just on top of an already surging energy, but to have it really be a poised and powerful resurgence. I think the malleability of this tempo, I've been told it's sort of radical what I'm positing, but all I'm doing is saying the content really has to determine tempo. And there's no such thing as tempo. It determines the pulse. It determines the momentum. It determines everything. Even within one subject, one part of the theme moves ahead, another, tries to hold up and behind, fall behind and hold on to it. And I think it's so much more fun to embrace that. And I'm still finding these moments when I get excited about the momentum of a particular fugue, and I get excited about the interaction of the voices. We've got triple invertible counterpoint, I'm following all of it, and it gets a little bit of kinetic excitement, and it really is something that to revel in. We need to relish and allow that to shape the narrative, and certainly the pace of the narrative. Content, context, and contour determine function and, in the end, everything. Oh my goodness, I've gone on way too long. Thank you, Christina, for those wonderful comments. And Ashley, gosh, it's been so amazing working together again. We're gonna do another one of these very, very soon. So I hope you all join us and work together on some wonderful music. Thank you all. It's been wonderful being with you. Thank you.